Hey there, guys. Welcome to Entreaties, Episode 1. With us today, as our first guest, we have Ben from the Pathless Podcast. Ben, you want to give us a quick intro as to who you are, what you do?
Sure. I got together the guys who roleplay in the Pathless Podcast. We're a 5e and Pathfinder podcast. The main idea was that we've all been playing Pathfinder for a long time, and I thought it'd be interesting to get everyone together and learn 5e together. So currently our podcast is segmented into our 5th edition storyline, which is DM'd by me, our Pathfinder storyline, which is DM'd by Sam, that we use by comparison, and then finally our Tavern Talks, which are just the occasional talks about D&D, whether it's 5e or Pathfinder.
Excellent. And as has been mentioned before, I star in those campaigns as the main character, every single one of them.
Yep.
Corian Zilzant, High Elf Noble in Lightlessness, and Corellis Last Mixed Blood in Pumpkin Spice. So with that, just to go over again, since this is the first episode, basically I've asked Ben on to ask me questions about the Treatise, things that he either disliked, liked, needed more clarification on, thought was absolutely wrong. He's told me that he's brought hard-hitting questions, so I'll be looking forward to it. And then in the second half, we'll go with that for a while, and then I'll bring up another topic for us to talk about. And after the two topics, we will close, and you can look forward to next week's guest. So, go ahead, Ben.
All right. So, this is the first episode. Is there an episode 0 before this one, or is this your very first?
Yeah, episode 0 was the intro, just, explaining that it was happening and kind of the idea behind it.
Okay. So, first thing on the Treatises is I know that you define this game as a PNP RPG, which is a catch-all, and, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, for basically tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So the one thing I want to ask you is this a game that is trying to be more paper than digital or more digital than paper in the light of everything that we're seeing? And I bring that up because I was one of the many who was burned by Morningstar for 5e. So, I'm hoping for digital, but what are you foreseeing for Horizons?
Yeah, so, I mentioned this in the treatise that virtual alternatives to a lot of the tools are just plain better. And so I would definitely like to have digital tools to use and even see digital gameplay. The only thing I would say is that obviously not everybody is set up to play digitally, and that has some requirements. So keeping the system as playable in a traditional medium is one of the goals. That way, if you happen to not have computers or your tablets around or whatever, you can still, just pull out an old map or even just do it, verbally if necessary.
Okay. So there's not like a big change in between how accessible Pathfinder is digitally compared to how accessible Horizons is digitally?
There shouldn't be. If you're talking about like the SRD and stuff like that, and the different apps and stuff, like all that stuff is just going to have to come with time for the most part.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess I'm just talking about the way it plays is going to be not so different that, it lends itself to one medium over the other.
Oh, no. It should play like your traditional tabletop role-playing game.
Okay, cool. Next question I have for you is the big one, obviously. So we're talking about what do we need to play this game? I'm not going to get into the rule book yet. Let's talk about just the dice. We have pens, we have paper. What do we have to do for dice? Is it typical D20 system? Is it a D6 system? Is it a D4 system?
So, most of the subsystems in Horizons are D20 based. In particular, the martial combat, that kind of stuff, your typical fighter stuff is going to look a lot like what you did in Pathfinder and D&D, etc.
Okay.
Spellcasting gets a little heavy on the D20s. It still uses D20s, but you actually use multiple D20s. So I know we've known a lot of people with plenty of D20s, so that's never been a problem with us, but it is something to keep in mind. Otherwise, the skill system actually works off of a D6 pool, and that shouldn't be too much of a problem for most people because D6s are quite, popular. People normally have plenty of D6s laying around. So not only that, but the numbers that we're looking at right now are quite small. So we're talking like maybe 6, 7 D6s, which if you're going to cast a level 20 fireball, you typically have at least 10 D6s around,
Sure.
Yeah, in Pathfinder D&D, as the comparison.
Yeah, so the most common die used is a D6?
The most common die used is a D20. You'll use that most of the time. The D6s are for skill checks.
Gotcha.
And obviously damage stuff and, various effects, will rely on different size dice, but as a system.
Gotcha. So we're still going to have our D10s, our D4s, our D8s, and our D12s.
Right. They'll be used to randomize effects and outcomes and whatnot. But, kind of like D&D, you roll a D20 to first decide whether or not you pass that saving throw or pass the attack, whatever. Same idea. You roll the D20 first, or you roll a couple D20s, unless it's skill checks, and you find out from there.
All right. Is it true that originally you had planned for your system to be based off the D10s, and then you've now switched back to the D20s? Or
that was actually a previous system that I was writing. That kind of my goal for it got a bit convoluted. I don't want to say the goal got convoluted. Actually, it's just the execution ended up being way too time consuming to go with that system. So we don't have that system anymore.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I just want to make sure that my brain stays on Horizons then.
Mm-hmm.
Are you advocating for the hex grid for Horizons, or you really don't care?
I would advocate for no grid, honestly. That's my personal opinion, and, I don't think I mentioned this anywhere in the treatise, but I do have a background with tabletop wargaming, so I'm used to, having to measure stuff out. But as I note in the treatise, people like squares. They're easier for people to count, rather than using a tape measure or whatnot. I would like to use hex grids, especially because if you look at tactical games, a lot of tactical games use hex grids just because they're more flexible. But at the same time, it's one of those things you can always adapt the rules to a square grid. I don't see there being much difficulty going back and forth between, a hex grid and a square grid if you have to use a square grid. I personally would advocate the hex grid if you're going to use a grid system.
Okay. So your system, the way it's written,
Mm-hmm.
Are the majority of the characters like 20, 25, 30 feet movement, or is it different?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I kept with around about those numbers just because they were so familiar.
Okay.
There's not necessarily a reason why they couldn't be different. It's just a matter of relativity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing, using things that are already useful. Moving on to other, aspects of it. Is there anything that Horizons does differently to allow for, let's say, Roll20 play as opposed to in-person gameplay? Or is it better to be in person when you use Horizons? Are there any changes like that?
I don't believe there's anything inherent in the system. I'm pretty sure, back to, it's supposed to be flexible enough to play without the virtual, setup. So converting it to Roll20 or whatever should be just as, difficult or easy, depending on your familiarity with it, as Pathfinder or D&D.
Okay. Can you tell me about some features that you think are in Horizon that makes use of materials better suited, or we'll say more efficient, whether it's the drawing of the tactical maps or the keeping track of character scores and HPs? Are there any elements of Horizons that tries to improve the use of paper and pen?
I can't say that there's any that specifically try to make those items more effective. I will say that the initiative system currently in place is technically easier with an app to track it rather than tracking it, individually. However, I believe, looking at the things that I've been working on, that it's still possible and viable.
Cool. All right, I just thought I'd get some of those big, grand ideas taken care of. Let's get into, in the treatises, I like how you kind of set these arguments up. So I think one of them that, the way I translated it, is that a core element of role-playing is obviously not having to be within the rules, but instead within your character. So when it comes to character design and overview, you know, what have you done to make characters more realistic and more accessible to have the player become immersed in them?
So I've got two arguments that I can think of that kind of follows, and honestly I note in the treatise that they both kind of intermix, which is the role-playing flexibility argument and the player ability versus character ability argument. So in light of those two, basically, so there's a lot of stuff in 5th edition, I'm going to say, that kind of is unscripted, you know? It doesn't have a whole lot of rules. And I'm going to this one just because it's the first system that popped in my head because we've been playing it so often.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of brings up this problem where it's like, well, you kind of got to roleplay it out, but what if you're not a good role player, you know, but you still want to have fun with your friends, you know? And I'm going to say that in that sense, Horizons, you can expect a very similar situation to Pathfinder, you know, where there are rules to supplement the role-playing, and, you know, you can make those roles instead of role-playing. I kind of encourage that as an option just because I don't want to leave anybody left out.
Okay. That's good.
Going the opposite direction, kind of what your character can do as opposed to, or actually I guess that was that direction. So, that was a character to player, so player to character. So making sure that the roles confining your character, rather, there's a lot of character customization rules in Horizons to kind of narrow your character down into what he can and cannot do, and those are in place of classes, which this is another large topic that I don't think we'll get into today, but I didn't very much like the class system because you could have this, you know, let's not use swashbuckler, let's use knight. You might have this dexterous knight, you know, he's kind of the knight character, but for some reason, even though he's a dexterous knight, he has heavy armor and he has, you know, these other tanking, quote-unquote, abilities that just come bundled with the class. And alternate class features in Pathfinder went a ways to kind of give you some flexibility there, but I take it a step further and I give you, you know, more basic abilities that you can just choose and pick, as opposed to getting this lump sum and then, okay, I guess my character, even though I didn't envision him role-playing wise as a tanky character, still has these abilities for some reason.
So the characters don't have classes? I know you're going to get into that later, but I hadn't gotten a chance to read the treatises in that section.
Yeah. There are only archetypes, which are just kind of static bonuses, kind of pushing you down a specific path, as opposed to defining what that path is. And there's only 3 archetypes at the moment, which are martial, arcane, and specialist. So,
all right. Well, I won't make you jump into that. Okay. I do think we should keep going with the character design stuff. So, in past games, normally we have ability scores that make up our character, a class that makes up our character, feats, which is now a variant rule in 5e, and then skills. Why don't you tell me, we'll start with the first one, ability scores. Are they similar, the same? What do we have in Horizons?
Okay, so we call them attributes, and I decided to switch over to that because when you're talking about characters, you know, if I say my character's ability, the first thing you think of is, you know, a special attack, a special ability, a spell, or something like that. And so it became very difficult to, like, say, oh, his strength ability, like, you know, It didn't make too much sense. So just for the record, when we're talking about, you know, treaties and stuff, I'm going to be referring to attributes as opposed to abilities to just keep everything clear. So, on that note, in earlier editions of Horizons, I tried going with just 4 attributes because I looked at a whole bunch of different systems, right? And there's some systems that have like 8 or 10 attributes.
That's a lot of D6s.
Yeah. And it just kind of gets kind of confusing, I feel, for the player because it's like, well, what do I get from putting a good score in this attribute? And if I have, 3 good scores, is that good enough for 11 attributes? Or am I supposed to have 5 good scores with 11 attributes? So I tried paring it down to 4, decided that didn't really work just because the numbers got a little wonky in between, making sure that characters had good attributes, making sure that they could generate those attributes consistently. We're currently at 5, and as I get to the attributes section, just so that I have it for reference, basically we've paired Constitution off from Pathfinder or D&D. We've taken that and just lumped that into Strength, because all of your Constitution stuff kind of go with beefier characters, and it just kind of made sense. It was more intuitive that a beefier character, a stronger character, would also be tougher.
Mm-hmm.
So we took that, we removed it. Then Dexterity, originally we just renamed that to Agility, because a lot of the stuff that you use typically in Pathfinder are kind of Agility, like your AC bonus is kind of you dodging, Your reflex save is you dodging again. So a lot of this stuff is kind of Agility. So we just changed the name initially. But at the same time, we discovered that there's just so much that you can use Agility for, or Dexterity, that we ended up splitting that apart into Dexterity and Agility.
So if I can interrupt you real quick on Agility.
Absolutely.
Is Agility going to be something where as it changes, kind of like in 2nd edition, you're going to get more movement? Or anything cool like that, you know what I mean? Like above 20 agility, you get extra 5 feet. Above 25, you get extra 10 feet.
Yeah, I've definitely been thinking about that one. I think that is a good idea. It's just a matter of kind of balancing the ability and making sure that, if not necessarily nerfing agility in order to give it that kind of ability. One thing I found a lot is, especially when you take 3.5 and compare it to Pathfinder,
mm-hmm.
You start out on 3.5 and you have, let's say, Orc plus 2 Strength minus 2 Wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
And you hop over to 5th edition and it's plus 5 Strength, or plus 5, plus 2 Strength, plus 2 Con or something like that, and minus 2 Intelligence or whatever. And really, the fact of the matter is that you don't necessarily, so long as everything is balanced, you don't necessarily need to take away. So that's a long about way of saying, if I add movement to agility, right, as a bonus to agility, rather than, necessarily balancing agility down to compensate, I'm probably going to be looking at adding more stuff to strength and dexterity and intellect.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that.
Quite all right.
Use my phone for my for my notes.
Gotcha.
All right, so we left you after strength and agility to dexterity, and then I see a few others here.
Yeah, so just to touch on dexterity and agility, the difference that I was getting to there is that may not sound like a much of a difference, and it might sound like another one of those things like, what's the difference between intelligence and wisdom? But just to define that, the difference between dexterity and agility is basically hand-eye coordination and acrobatics, more or less. The flexibility and movement ability to move. And I was arguing with Brett about this when I first cut dexterity down completely and just changed it to agility. And he was like, why not have both? And it was one of those things, I wanted to try it with 4 attributes at the time. But obviously, now that we're back up to 5, it makes a lot more sense. His example is, if you take baseball and you have a pitcher and a shortstop, the kind of plays that the pitcher makes are a lot different than the kinds of plays that the shortstop makes. If the shortstop dives for a ball, that's agility. The pitcher pitching the ball is dexterity. And you can very easily see how, dexterity as a lump score, where it's kind of handling all that stuff in D&D and Pathfinder, doesn't really differentiate those two enough. Yeah. So if I make a character that's supposed to be a marksman, all of a sudden, inherently, by having good dexterity, he can do triple backflips, even though that's not necessarily part of his character.
No, I think I like the separation. Another thing along those lines with agility that I just hope to put an earworm in your thing is faster casting speeds or something. You know what I mean? If you get fast enough, you can do somatic components faster. There's interesting aspects to being fast compared to being dexterous. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
That I like about agility. So
okay, I feel that's a little too specific, but
Sure.
it's an idea.
no, yeah, just
So
it's from Dark Souls too. Sorry,
oh, okay, gotcha.
I can't help but reference the games that I love. So
Absolutely. So next one on the list is intellect, and the reverse of dexterity, where we took dexterity and split it into dexterity and agility. Intellect is intelligence and wisdom. We took those two and put them together, and there's a couple reasons for that. The first and most forefront for me is just that every time I had to teach somebody a D&D character, they were like, what's the difference between intelligence and wisdom? And
Right.
if you got to explain that to somebody, then clearly it's not a very good...
that's actually a really good point. Yeah, everyone's asked that question. It's
yeah, I'm pretty sure like 95% of D&D players worldwide, first question making the character is
yeah.
what do I get out of intelligence as opposed to wisdom, and what's the difference?
Well, for
And-
someone who minored in philosophy, I can tell you that it is a big difference to a lot of people. But
And
ahead.
I do understand the differences. It's just not necessary in role playing.
sure,
And I get into this in the the spellcaster section. But one of the benefits to having a split was just that you could get this different flavor between the arcane and divine magic. I don't so much have different classes, different major archetypes of magic with divine and arcane, so it wasn't necessary to have that difference, in attribute scores. So that wasn't stopping me. And furthermore, with the knowledge score, if I had this really wise sage, he could have a 10 in intelligence and still have an 18 wisdom, and therefore he couldn't tell you the difference between an inchworm and a tarantula,
yeah, I understand.
just because his knowledge nature score could have been bunk.
Yeah, so you're actually getting rid of a lot of things that don't make sense. Like when you talked about the
I'm trying
dexterity
to.
and yeah,
I'm trying
no,
to.
more rounded individuals, and that probably lends to your archetype system a little bit as well, where people aren't just like, I just smash, or I like books, but I don't know how to leave my front door.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff, especially with intelligence and wisdom, it seems like something that really should just be a role-playing situation. Like, I have a sage and therefore he is wise, I can throw an 18 in intellect and just say, okay, that's his, wisdom, quote-unquote, speaking.
Sure.
And it doesn't really interfere with too much mechanically. Finally on the list is the attribute I'm calling ego. And
Yeah.
this replaces charisma. Was there anything you wanted to say about that? Because you kind of gave me this, yeah.
Well, obviously, being into psychology a little bit, ego, I think, has a lot of things with it. So I think it's probably a good use. And I want to say it's called spiral dynamics. Yeah, spiral dynamics is a psychology. It's like a developmental psychology way to view the world. And within it, they at least talk about the ego as an essential part of developing personhood, in that when we have an ego, we realize ourselves are separate from others, which, this is pretty standard thought. But I will say that I like the idea of an ego over charisma, all that said and done, because someone who actually has charisma can almost see who they are and see who other people are, and use that power against others. And charisma is just like, oh, I'm good with people. You could be a really nice guy and be charismatic, but to have an ego almost makes it feel like you can control other people. And I don't know, that's what I think of with the ego. I think it's a nice move.
Okay. So that's good to hear. I go over this in a pretty long rant. Not a rant. I shouldn't call it a rant. I'm more professional than that in the treatise. But basically, I took charisma and I broke it down, and I basically said, the way this thing is working is just way too vague, and therefore a lot of stuff that concerns charisma either doesn't make sense in some character situations. For example, we always joke that, the girl we want has an 18 charisma and we have a 10, and therefore we got to roll opposed charisma checks. But
Sure.
The kind of stuff we were just talking about being charismatic with people, that doesn't have anything to do with looks. Like, a 10 out of 10, quote unquote, female is not necessarily an 18 charisma.
Sure.
So, there's a lot of things.
The power of their personality, right?
Right.
The ego is the power of the personality.
Right, and that's, again, part of the reason why I changed the name, to shift that away from kind of everybody's traditional thought about charisma as a role, a tabletop gamer, because we have these ideas about, different ways that D&D works because we've played the game for so long. That kind of changing the name also helps to differentiate it so that we're not saying, oh, he must be really good looking because he has an 18 charisma,
Right. Yeah. No, I understand that. I think it's been a while since we made jokes like that, but I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So that covers all the ability scores.
Attributes.
Oh, I'm sorry, all the attribute scores. That's correct. So I had brought up attributes, feats. You got any feats? And we don't have to go dive into them. I just want to know, like, general oversee. This is kind of an introduction.
So, basically, yes to 120, 30%. Basically, I almost want to say you're looking 75% at feats, since that's analogous to the new system, the difference between, having a class archetype, class structure system to this more free-formed build your character system. It's kind of like everything is feats, almost.
Okay, but are your feats then just class features that you pick for your character as you level up? And do you get them when you level up?
Well, what's the difference between a feat and a class feature is the thing. The difference is that you're forced with one and you get the choice with others. So if you have the choice with all of them, then there ceases to be a differentiation.
I just wanted to hear it. Yeah, I wanted to hear that it pretty much is class features that you pick yourself, even though like feats can mean that too. So if a class feature were to say like bulwark one defense, gain plus one defense when using a large shield, that would be for a certain type of Pathfinder archetype, paladin or something like that. But in this case, I would just be able to choose it as my character. Now, the real question is, are we looking at a ton of prereqs here? Are we looking at needing a certain attribute score to get access to certain ones?
So, basically, it works off of ability points, this new system, which are more or less a currency to purchase abilities with. So, you've got that as a requirement. So, something really good is going to have a higher ability point cost just to kind of gate it as higher level content. At the same time, you can just save up your ability points if you feel like you want that sooner rather than later. There are a couple other gating mechanics in play currently, and I don't have too many of the abilities done yet just because I'm still working on some of the infrastructure and making sure that's fine. But I did intend for there to be some prerequisites.
Okay. Can you walk me through like a realistic example of what this looks like to do this? So at first level, how many ability points do you get, and how is that not super confusing? Like I get the attribute points now replace ability scores, but I used to get an ability point at 4th level in Pathfinder, and I got 2 ability points in D&D 5e. So what do you got for me? Like first level, we get how many ability points, and why?
Honestly, I don't have the numbers set in stone yet. Here, actually,
if you ballpark them, that's fine. No, well, I don't need exacts. I just wondered, like, ballpark. Like, I get 2, I get 1.
No, it's going to be in the hundreds.
Oh, okay. So this is like a currency like Japanese yen.
Yeah,
kinda
it's going to be more like that.
Okay, but it's not like 1st to 5th level characters generally choose 1 cost ability point things, and then 5 to 10 characters generally choose 2 costs, so on and so forth.
I wanted the flexibility in it.
Okay, cool.
By making it cost more, higher amounts, it gives me more flexibility in designing stuff. Then I have more leeway. I don't have to say, well, both of these attacks are 1 ability, but this one's a little bit better, so you kind of get screwed out of,
that's what
imaginary power. Okay. So this way, the one that's just a little bit better costs a little bit more.
Gotcha. Can you upgrade your things later? Like, can you trade in since it's like kind of a currency?
No.
Okay, just wondering.
Yeah, that's one thing that I didn't really... retraining in D&D kind of makes a little bit of sense just because you get stuck with all this stuff as kind of a bulk package with the class system and whatnot. So being able to retrain a couple things here and there kind of helps, you develop your character a little better. But with the ability system, I feel that your character is flexible enough that, you pick up this ability, you're going to have that ability,
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I also have some stuff in place to not make it, like, let's say you purchase, a tier 1 attack,
Mm-hmm.
there will be reasons to use that tier 1 attack, later on down the road still. It's not going to get completely outclassed and, worthless.
Oh, that's cool. That's always a good thing. I think that's like what we need more of. And I think I kind of feel that with a lot of the spells in 5th edition. I feel like a lot of them remain useful, even at higher levels. And, there always were like useful first level spells. But at this point, like with, even spells that stop an enemy from healing, like you'll want to use that at any point in the future, which I think is a spell of a wizard or sorcerer spell in 5th edition, right? Wasn't Matt using something similar?
Possibly, I don't recall.
He had ones that had like no reactions. But I'll keep it moving. Are we allowed to get into skills here too? You let me know when we're going too far beyond the scope of things here.
Well, the funny thing is that we're about halfway through where I wanted to be, time-wise.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of took attributes, which was going to be my topic, so we're actually ahead of schedule at this point.
Okay,
so
obviously.
We can do a bit of an overview.
Okay.
So skills basically work on the dice pool system now.
What does that mean?
And basically you'll have, let's say 4 written down next to jump, okay?
4 different skills?
No, just a 4. The number 4 written down next to jump.
Okay, that's
You'll
fine,
take 4 dice, you'll roll them, get 5 or higher, any of the 5 or higher passes.
Okay, 46.
46, any 5 or higher passes. And basically for jump, the reason I picked that one is because that's one of those skills, and I'm trying to see if I can't do this with all the skills, but I know at least, the stuff like jump, where you rolled, for comparison to Pathfinder, a 25 on jump, now you're jumping 25 feet instead of 10 feet,
Sure, yeah.
So I'm looking at stuff like that for skills, and so if you pass 2 with 2 on the jump check, then that gets you, 20 feet instead of 10 feet, which would have been 1.
Okay.
Again, round numbers right now until I have it completely hammered out, but...
I have, so much to talk about with this.
Alright, we can use this as my subject then, since my subject got...
Overviewed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, the first question I have, of course, is... The likelihood of me rolling a 5 or 6 on a d6
is 33%.
33%. What about when I just need to make a 10-foot jump, and that should be easy for my character? I guess the first question.
So if you have 4 in jump,
yeah,
1 in 3 of those on average is going to be your 10-foot.
Okay. So
you're rolling 4 of them. So long as you have a 3 in jump,
yeah,
you're most of the time going to get it.
Okay. Will my number of 4 increase, and how does it increase? How is skill progression?
That's a good question. It will increase. I'm trying to decide. I don't think I'm going to have it ability point focused. Basically, what this is inspired, not the dice pool system, but the skill progression is inspired by, is by the Mongoose Gaming and Chaosium structure of doing skill progression, which is every time you succeed with a skill, you mark that skill, and then at the end of an adventure, you get chances to increase that skill and make it better.
Oh.
Because one of the problems that I had with the class system in D&D is that I could never use my lock-picking skill, and yet for some reason, 10 levels later, I'm a master locksmith.
Really, really good at it.
Okay. So
how many things are based on you leveling up? I assume you do level up in Horizons.
Well, you don't level up. You get ability points.
Okay, so I'm not a 5th level archetype caster in Horizons. Okay,
not at all. You just happen to have 1,000 ability points that you've spent, and some of them's in the bank right now. But
interesting. I guess we should follow through with that then. What can I spend my ability points on?
Basically anything.
Okay, well, break that down into D&D
like I said.
for me.
Skills, I'm not so sure that I should sell quote-unquote improvements
I don't think so. No, it sounds like you gotta work on them.
No, that's definitely the way I was leaning, but I at least figured it was worth the mention. Everything else, though, basically the way I'm running it, because one of the concerns that I've heard most from one of my good friends that has played a lot of role-playing games is that people want to take the fight because the fight gives them EXP.
That's true.
And even though the DMG says, if the group sneaks by the Minotaur, gives them EXP for the Minotaur,
sure,
it doesn't always happen, and the party isn't always certain that you're going to give it to them.
Right. No, definitely. I completely agree.
Instead of... That's one of the problems with EXP and leveling, in my opinion. So instead, what I do is I say, okay, you as a DM know where kind of your mile markers are in your quest. So when you decide, okay, when the party gets this far, relative to where they are in the overlying arc, I'm going to give them, their ability points for making it that far. And I'll adjust that ability point amount up and down based on, the things they did. Kind of like you would with giving bonus EXP and whatnot, in D&D.
Are you going to have a chart, though, that kind of keeps... for DMs, in mind, how much power they're giving their players? A player who has 10,000 ability points is about equal to a 5th level character or something like that, because I think I would be very confused in knowing unless I read through all of the things that they can buy, knowing how much to give them. And are monsters going to be set already with a pre-existing amount of ability points that you do get from killing them, or is it all just kind of open-ended, the DM chooses?
All right, so, and this is actually the next thing I was going to talk about. I will, again, it's going to take a while to, see how this works out and get good numbers for it. Good numbers of, okay, I guess this is this much power, this many ability points should be on average this much power for a player. But there definitely will be a chart to help guideline that. I am not in any way going to tell the DMs to give their players X amount of ability points for reaching certain milestones.
Even if that's killing a creature.
Even if that's killing a creature. Okay. Because I want the campaign, and this is another thing that I have a problem with D&D, is I want the DM to be able to predictively progress his campaign. So if you roll a random encounter with 20 dire badgers, and your party kills them, that was a random encounter that you weren't expecting them to have. Now they're 10 levels higher than the boss monster for the next area,
Right, yeah.
So not only does that take that problem away, where they're getting EXP that you didn't bank on them having, or mixing EXP because they decide to walk around the castle instead of go through the castle, and all of a sudden they're lower level. Not only is that avoiding all those problems, but it also lets you as the DM kind of set up the campaign that you want to play, So if you don't feel like having super powerful adventures, and this is something obviously that you've got to talk to your play group about, you've got to, be upfront with them and say, okay, I'm giving you this many ability points to start out with because I want you to be, because this is the power level of the campaign I want to run. And which I didn't mention earlier, but you can change the starting ability points, and have that reflect the power level of the campaign. It's not going to be a set amount for all characters forever and ever and ever, It will be based on the campaign you want to play.
Sure. Is that difficulty settings?
More or less. I mean, I shouldn't even say that. It's not even so much difficulty setting. It's just progression settings.
Yeah. So the Pathfinder book has in the beginning, whether or not you want to play a fast progression, average progression, slow progression, and
exactly.
It alters the amount of XP needed to obtain a level.
Right. It will be very similar to that, as opposed to easy or hard. So you could end up fighting goblins for a while instead of, killing one band of goblins, getting a whole bunch of ability points from your DM for killing the goblins, and then moving on to fight, orcs. And then the next quest is fighting hobgoblins or...
Yeah. Is this like a personal story of yours where your group ended up killing like 20 goblins and you were forced to give them 100 XP per or whatever it may be?
I don't know that ever happened. I don't have a specific example. I just know that I know that it has happened not to that degree in my campaigns where I didn't expect the group to run into an encounter, but I felt like giving them a random encounter and ended up being an high XP random encounter, and therefore they leveled up earlier. And then I know there was another time where, because the party was so wounded from a random encounter that I knew about what was happening, like I kind of said, okay, I'm just going to, at some point in this travel, I'm going to throw a random encounter in here, and I'll just figure it out on the spot,
Sure.
So I expected them to be, a little bit higher in XP, but because they were so wounded from that encounter, all of a sudden I had to skip the next encounter, which was worth more XP, Okay. So then they had less XP at that point because they had to skip an encounter because there was no way they were going to be able to survive it,
Yeah. No, I get that. That brings up another good question. When can I spend my currency?
All right. So I am in two minds about this, okay? I kind of want to say, if you watch a lot of like action shows and stuff, there will be times when the character just kind of whips out this brand new attack or whatever, or this hidden, this kind of source of strength, and all of a sudden he overcomes his adversary, So I kind of like that idea of, holy crap, I need to, spend some ability points on an extra, +2 strength or whatever, right now in order to beat this Lich King, because I, didn't expect to be able to do it, or I need to pick up this ability so that I don't die this immediate moment. And because you don't retrain like in D&D, you don't have that option of like going back and saying, I didn't really want this ability, Now that's a permanent detriment to your character. It's not something I feel that it can be abused,
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like it's something that, if you had to take this thing to survive, well, you're not going to be able to abuse that and say, I didn't really want that, and cash it back in. Sure, so I'm kind of okay with on-the-spot buy. At the same time, I feel that a lot of people would be uncomfortable with that. So I feel like the core rule may be that you have to do it on downtime. Like, you have to specifically be in town training, to spend your ability points. Or at the very least, be traveling and not, too engaged in combat. Like, maybe...
Long rest type of rule, or...
Not even a long rest, because long rest is just a night, but... Yeah. It would have to be, like, the traditional level up rule, where it's like, you've got to spend the whole night and the next day, without fighting, just resting in order to level up. Like, I'm pretty sure that's technically in the DMG how it's supposed to work.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Mm-hmm. If I'm running my own Horizons campaign, I'm probably going to do buy on the spot, because I just think that sounds like so much fun. But, me, I'm also, like, not totally into realism. So, I think we're getting clunky with it all. But I get the idea, so chances are the rules will be flexible, as they have been with many things, but you are searching for something that makes sense and not something that's just gamey, so that we can have the immersive, realistic RPG that allows us to enjoy our characters to the level that many other systems do not, if I can sum that up right.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean...
Okay, yeah.
If possible, that's the point of this whole entire series, because if something is not working, if people feel like it's definitely not the correct direction, then I want to hear why, and ultimately, as the guy making the system, I'm going to have the final say, but I feel that I can be persuaded,
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Well, obviously, we kind of went over skills for a little bit. We definitely did feats. We know that there's no levels. We know that there's barely any classes. Only other core component that I can think of is HP and AC. No, so like we have hit points and we have an armor class.
Hit points are going to be ability points, bought with ability points. So if you want to spend all your ability points on hit points, because you just want to have the meat shield character, you have the flexibility to do so, and you won't have to waste, ability points gaining a level that gives you trap finding for some reason.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's cool. What about the AC?
The AC, it more or less functions the same way, but instead of just being a flat 10, 10 plus... Actually, I shouldn't even say... Let me back up and rescind that phrase. That phrase never happened.
Sure.
AC is not armor class. It is defense rating, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what you get is you get your... what is basically your base attack bonus. Okay, it's your combat prowess in our system, but base attack bonus. You get that to your defense. You get your dexterity to your defense, which is kind of, you fending off attacks with your weapon kind of thing. And then you get any other bonuses from abilities or whatnot. The armor actually gets moved over to a damage reduction, because that kind of makes a whole lot more sense than deflecting the attack completely,
I've heard this argument before in the role-playing communities, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so armor and shield. Shield, there is some... I'm not sure if I've moved that completely defense rating yet, but at the very least there is a block reaction that you can take that until your next turn will increase your defense to by your shield's amount. But armor and shield are more damage reduction.
Cool. Can I buy attribute points? Did we cover that?
We did not cover that. Yes, you can.
Okay, so pretty much everything is bought for your character, and the buy system exists to allow for balance in between players, but basically allows you to make any character in the world, and the meat shield or the glass cannon.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yep. I mean, sounds like a JRPG. Some of the typical...
I guess.
Nah, I don't know.
I feel like JRPGs have actually less, but, where it's like, you get bonuses to these stats, and then you get bonuses to these stats. Like, you don't really get to choose. It's like, when you level up.
Again, I have Dark Souls in mind, where...
Okay, gotcha.
You may need to play, because it'll help move things along here. But, so yeah, let me ask you. I know time's running a while now here. Anything that you had that you need to cover in your notes here?
Yeah, I think that's about good for this episode. We'll save everything else for the other people that we'll have on, so that we have more topics to talk about. So yeah, that should be good. You want to plug Pathless Pod, and then we'll do the outro?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you for having me on. It was fun talking about Horizons, and I am interested in giving it a test play. So hopefully we'll be able to do that soon. Pathless Pod is the podcast that I get to do with Reed and a couple of my other friends. We just record ourselves playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and Pathfinder. So if you are into that, feel free to check it out at pathlesspod.com, or on iTunes, it's the Pathless Podcast, or in an RSS reader. Generally, they find them right away. But yeah, thank you for having me on, Reed.
Yep, absolutely. Was a good time, lots of good questions, and now that we've covered a lot of Horizons, I feel like everybody else can feel free to critique the Treatise. So that was a good intro video. So, yeah, like Ben said, you can catch me also at Pathless Pod. Thanks again, Ben, for coming on. Otherwise, if you haven't read the Treatise yet, you can find that at bit.ly/ALRPG Treatise. That's the short link for it.
Or below in the video description.
Or below in the video description. I'm also going to put an annotation over my name, since you don't need to click my name to get to this account, since you're already here. So we'll just do that as well.
Nice.
So if you could please like, favorite, subscribe, that we can stay up to date. And we've got a Facebook page for Horizons that you can make sure you know everything that's being released there if you like the page. So do all that stuff, and should be great. Look forward to next week's episode, and from Reed, Adamant Life, Have a great afternoon, evening, day, wherever you're at.
And from Ben, don't have a good time.